Silent wife is humiliated at family dinner, but everyone is shocked when Emily Thompson held the silverware with trembling hands as her husband's family whispered cruel comments around the table. Married to Michael for 3 years, she had never managed to earn the respect of her in-laws, who saw her as a silent stranger, who didn't belong in that elegant home in the Beverly Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. "A woman who doesn't speak isn't even fit to give orders to the maid," said Mrs. Cynthia, her mother-in-law, raising her wineglass with a cruel smile. "Just imagine, Michael, how will she raise your children if she can't even open her mouth?" The laughter echoed through the dining room, adorned with crystal and fine china. Michael lowered his eyes to his plate, without the courage to defend his wife. Emily observed every face around the table, committing to memory every poisonous word that came from those smiling mouths. "Mother, please," murmured Michael, but his voice came out so softly that no one paid attention. "What is it, son?" retorted Cynthia, pretending not to have heard. "I'm just telling the truth. This young woman is a disgrace to our family. She can't even participate in a civilized conversation." Amanda, Emily's younger sister-in-law, laughed too loudly, as she always did when she wanted attention. "Just yesterday, I ran into Victoria Tanner at the club. You know who she is, right? Congressman Tanner's wife. She asked about Michael's wife, and I was at a loss for words. How do I explain that my brother-in-law married a—" She made a dramatic pause. "Someone with that limitation?" The words cut through the air like sharp blades. Emily clenched the linen napkin on her lap, fighting back the tears that insisted on welling up in her eyes. She had learned to control her emotions during the 3 years of marriage, but some nights she still cried alone in the bathroom, muffling her sobs with a towel so Michael wouldn't hear. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mr. George, the patriarch of the Williams family, slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses clink. "Enough of this chit-chat," he said in an authoritative voice. "You're all dancing around the subject like children. I'll be direct. Emily, you need to understand that you can no longer interfere with the family business. Michael is being held back at the company because of your situation." Emily raised her eyes to her father-in-law, trying to understand what he was getting at. Michael swallowed hard, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Father, what are you talking about?" asked Michael, finally finding his voice. "I'm talking about the important clients who avoid our business dinners because they're embarrassed by the presence of someone who can't participate in the conversations," replied George, cutting a piece of meat with sharp movements. "Johnson himself commented the other day that he feels uncomfortable. He said he doesn't know how to act around her." Cynthia nodded, as if this confirmed all her suspicions. "I always said this union wouldn't work," she murmured, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "A family like ours needs a woman who knows how to represent our name in society." Dorothy, the maid who had worked in the house for over 15 years, entered discreetly to serve the second course. She had known Emily since she was dating and had always held a special affection for the young woman. As she passed by her chair, she whispered softly, "Don't pay any mind to this nonsense, dear." Cynthia turned like a hawk spotting prey. "Dorothy, how many times must I repeat that you are not to meddle in family conversations? Go to the kitchen and only come out when you're called." The woman lowered her head, apologizing, and quickly left. Emily felt a pang of guilt seeing someone scolded for trying to defend her. Sometimes she wondered if her presence in that house wasn't causing problems for everyone around. "Just look at her," said Amanda, pointing her fork at Emily. "She can't even say thank you to Dorothy. What kind of upbringing is that?" "Enough, Amanda," said Michael, this time more firmly. "You're all crossing the line." "We're crossing the line?" Cynthia let out a bitter laugh. "Son, you're the one who's blind. You need to open your eyes to reality. This girl isn't fit for our family." George wiped his mouth with the napkin and leaned back in his chair, assuming the pose of someone about to deliver an important verdict. "Michael, your mother and I have talked a lot about this situation. We've decided it's time to take drastic action." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Amanda stopped chewing to pay attention. Emily felt her heart beating so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. "What kind of action?" asked Michael, his voice tense. "We're hiring a special teacher to teach Emily how to communicate properly," announced Cynthia, as if she were doing a great favor. "There's a very reputable professional who works with people who have disabilities. She'll teach sign language and other forms of communication so Emily can at least try to participate in conversations." Emily felt her blood boil in her veins. They were talking about her as if she were a problematic child who needed correction. The worst part was the condescending way Cynthia spoke, as if she were offering a generous solution to an inconvenient problem. "Furthermore," continued George, "we'll establish some rules for social events. Emily will only participate when absolutely necessary, and even then she'll stay in the background without drawing attention to her limitation." "Have you all gone mad?" exploded Michael, throwing his napkin on the table. "She's my wife, not a pet you can train." "Michael Williams," shouted Cynthia, slamming her hand on the table, "I won't tolerate you speaking to me like that. We're trying to help you save your marriage and your career." "Save my marriage? My marriage is fine, thank you." "It's fine?" Amanda laughed scornfully. "Michael, you barely touch your own wife. Everyone notices how distant you are from each other." Emily felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. It was true that the intimacy between her and Michael had diminished in recent months, but she thought no one had noticed. The constant pressure from the family and the malicious comments had created an invisible barrier between them. "That's none of your business," said Michael, but his voice sounded less convincing. "It is our business," retorted George. "You're our son and heir to the family business. Your personal choices affect all of us." Cynthia stood up and walked to the china cabinet, from which she took a document folder. Emily watched every movement of her mother-in-law, sensing that something even worse was coming. "Since we're on the subject," said Cynthia, returning to the table with the folder in hand, "we might as well settle all pending matters right away." "What matters?" asked Michael, suspicious. "The family lawyer has prepared some documents that Emily needs to sign," explained George, resuming his authoritative tone. "These papers will protect the family assets in case the marriage doesn't work out." "A post-nuptial agreement?" Michael turned pale. "You did this behind my back?" "We did it to protect you," said Cynthia, opening the folder and spreading the papers on the table. "Someone who can't even communicate properly shouldn't have unrestricted access to the Williams family fortune." Emily looked at the documents with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She could perfectly read all those humiliating clauses that treated her like a mentally incompetent person. It was as if they wanted to officially turn her into a second-class citizen. "In case of separation," Cynthia read aloud, "Emily Thompson Williams will renounce any rights to assets acquired during the marriage, including the house, the cars, company stocks, and family properties." "Mother, this is absurd," protested Michael. "It's protection, son. Necessary protection," said George. "Besides, there's a clause stating that if Emily fails to adapt to the family's social standards within 6 months, the marriage will be automatically annulled." "Annulled?" Michael stood up abruptly from his chair. "You've completely lost your minds." "Lost our minds?" Amanda also stood up, pointing at Emily. "Look at her closely, Michael. Do you see any reaction? A normal person would be outraged, would try to defend themselves, would do something. She just sits there like a porcelain doll." Emily felt all her emotions swirling inside her chest like a hurricane. Anger, humiliation, sadness, despair, everything mixed into a storm she needed to control. For years, she had learned to hide her feelings, but it had never been as difficult as at that moment. "She doesn't react because she can't react," said Michael, trying to defend her. "You know the difficulties she faces." "Difficulties?" Cynthia laughed cruelly. "Michael, darling, open your eyes. Do you really believe that a person who lost her speech in an accident still has normal emotional reactions? Look at her. It's as if she's empty inside." Cynthia's words were like stabs to Emily's heart. She wanted to scream. She wanted to say that she was far from empty, that she felt every cruel word like a deep wound. She wanted to explain that she had chosen silence not out of incapacity, but as a form of protection. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing, "Perhaps Mom is right," said Amanda, sitting down again and adopting a falsely concerned tone. "Michael, have you ever stopped to think that maybe Emily has other problems besides speech? Mental problems?" "Amanda!" Michael slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! I won't allow you to speak about my wife like that." "Allow it or not, son," said George coldly. "The facts are there. 3 years of marriage and no progress, no improvement, no sign that she even tries to integrate into the family." "She does try," protested Michael, but his voice sounded desperate, as if he himself doubted the words. "Try how?" asked Cynthia. "Give me one example, Michael. One single situation where she showed effort to be part of our family." Michael opened his mouth to answer, but fell silent. Emily noticed he was struggling to find arguments, and that hurt more than all the insults from his family. She had always tried to be a good wife, taking care of the house, supporting Michael in silence, being present even without words. "See?" said Amanda triumphantly. "Not even you can properly defend her." Dorothy appeared discreetly at the living room door, hesitating whether to interrupt or not. Cynthia made an impatient gesture for her to approach. "What is it now, Dorothy?" "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Cynthia, but there's someone at the door looking for Mrs. Emily." Everyone turned to Emily, surprised. She rarely received visitors, especially without prior notice. "Who is it?" asked Michael. "It's an elderly lady. She said she's a friend of Mrs. Emily's family," explained Dorothy. "What family?" said Cynthia with disdain. "Emily has no family. Her parents died in the same accident that left her like this, and she has no one else." "Let the person in," said Michael. "Maybe it's someone who can clarify some things." Dorothy went to get the visitor. Emily felt her heart race. She knew exactly who it was, and her presence there could change everything. It was Mrs. Margaret, the only person who knew the whole truth about her condition. "I hope it's not someone with the same problems," murmured Mary, provoking laughter from her mother. After a few minutes, Dorothy returned accompanied by a grey-haired lady wearing simple but elegant clothes. Mrs. Margaret entered the room with firm steps, observing each person present with sharp eyes. "Good evening," she said with a clear and polite voice. "I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I need to speak with Emily about a very important matter." "And you are?" asked George, automatically assuming the role of host. "I am Margaret Wilson, a friend of the Thompson family for over 40 years. I met Emily when she was still a child." Cynthia and Mary exchanged mocking glances. It was obvious they considered the woman an intruder from a lower social class. "Well," said Cynthia with false kindness, "I'm afraid you've had a wasted trip. As you can see, Emily has certain limitations. She can't hold a conversation." Mrs. Margaret looked at Emily with a warm smile, then turned to Cynthia with a very different expression. "Limitations?" she repeated as if the word were strange. "What kind of limitations are you talking about?" "She doesn't speak," explained Mary, speaking slowly as if Margaret were deaf. "She lost her speech in a car accident when she was a child." Mrs. Margaret fell silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Then she began to laugh, a low laugh that grew into a genuine chuckle. "Lost her speech," she said between laughs. "Emily? How a little chatterbox Emily, who never stopped talking even to breathe." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone looked at Emily, who was pale as a sheet. "You must be confusing her with someone else," said Michael hesitantly. "My wife suffered a very severe trauma that affected her ability to speak." "Trauma?" Mrs. Margaret stopped laughing abruptly. "What trauma? Michael, isn't it? You're her husband." "I am." "Then you should know that Emily never had any car accident. Her parents did die, but it was from natural causes, years apart from each other. And Emily was perfectly fine when she buried them. The bomb had exploded." Emily closed her eyes, knowing there was no way to maintain the charade any longer. 3 years of voluntary silence were about to come to an end. "You must be mistaken," said Cynthia, but her voice sounded uncertain. "Mistaken?" Mrs. Margaret took a yellowed envelope from her bag. I have here letters that Emily wrote to me less than 5 years ago. Long letters, detailed, full of life and personality. Letters from a person who definitely had no trouble expressing herself. Michael took one of the letters with trembling hands and began to read. His expression gradually changed from confusion to shock, then to something that seemed like anger mixed with disbelief. "Emily," he said with a tense voice, "what does this mean?" All eyes turned to her. Emily knew the moment of truth had come, but she still hesitated. 3 years pretending to be mute had become a habit almost impossible to break. "Speak, Emily," shouted Mary, losing her composure. "If you can speak, speak now." "Calm down, child," said Mrs. Margaret, taking control of the situation. "Let me explain a few things first." She sat in the empty chair beside Emily and held her hand affectionately. Emily has always been a very observant and intelligent girl. When her parents died, she was deeply shaken emotionally. She went through a period without speaking at all, but out of sadness, not physical inability. "And then?" asked Michael, still holding the letters. "Then she recovered completely. She started speaking again, studying, working. She was a normal, healthy young woman when she met you, Michael." Cynthia was dumbfounded, trying to process the information. "So why did she pretend to be mute?" asked George, with growing anger in his voice. "She didn't pretend from the beginning," explained Mrs. Margaret. "At the start of the relationship, Emily spoke normally. But after a few meetings with your family, she began to feel out of place, judged, diminished. Emily remembered those first encounters perfectly. The jokes about her humble origins, the comments about her lack of class, the way they treated her like an intruder trying to steal Michael away from his family. One day she told me she had decided to stay silent during a visit to your house, just to observe how you behaved when you thought she couldn't defend herself," continued Mrs. Margaret. "And what happened?" asked Michael, though he seemed to already guess the answer. "You showed yourselves exactly as you are," said Mrs. Margaret, looking directly at Cynthia and George, "cruel, prejudiced, petty." Emily realized she had discovered the true nature of the family she was preparing to join. Amanda stood up abruptly, pointing at Emily. "So you've been deceiving us all this time, pretending to be mute to spy on us?" "Not to spy," corrected Mrs. Margaret. "To protect herself. Emily knew that if she kept speaking, you would find other ways to humiliate her. Silence became her armor." Michael was looking at Emily with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was hurt there, but also something that seemed like admiration or surprise. 3 years, he murmured. 3 years pretending. 3 years observing, said Mrs. Margaret. 3 years listening to every cruel word, every malicious comment, every plan to get rid of her. Emily heard everything. George slammed his fist on the table forcefully. "This is unacceptable, a complete farce. I'll sue this woman for fraud, for... "Why?" asked Mrs. Margaret calmly. "For having exposed your character, for having shown how you treat someone you consider vulnerable?" Cynthia's face was red with anger and humiliation. "She made fools of us, sat there like an idiot while we tried to help her." "Help?" Mrs. Margaret laughed humorlessly. "You call it help, the cruel comments about her not being fit to be a wife, the jokes about her inability, the plans to annul the marriage. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing." Emily finally found the courage to look directly at Michael. There was so much she wanted to explain, so much he needed to understand. But the words seemed stuck in her throat after so long in silence. "Emily," said Michael, in a softer voice, "please, talk to me. Explain what happened." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. It was strange how silence had become natural after 3 years. Mrs. Margaret squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Go on, dear. It's time to free yourself." Emily took a deep breath, and with a voice hoarse from disuse, whispered, I can explain." The impact was immediate. Amanda dropped her wine glass, which shattered on the floor. Cynthia stood with her mouth open, unable to utter a word. George leaned back in his chair as if he'd been punched. "My God," murmured Michael. "Your voice, It's beautiful. Emily smiled timidly. It was true that her voice was different, deeper and more hesitant, but it was still her voice. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she said, still speaking softly. "I know what I did was wrong, but—" "Wrong?" interrupted Cynthia, recovering from the initial shock. "Wrong is an understatement. You deceived us, manipulated us, made the entire family look ridiculous." "The family did that on its own," retorted Emily, finding more firmness in her voice. "I just offered the opportunity." "How dare you speak to me like that?" shouted Cynthia, rising from her chair. "I dare because now I can speak," replied Emily, also standing up. "And I have a lot to say." The transformation was impressive. The quiet, submissive young woman had given way to a determined woman with an upright posture and a firm gaze. It was as if she were removing a mask she had worn for years. "First," said Emily, looking directly at Cynthia, "I want you to know that I heard every cruel word you said about me, every joke, every malicious comment, every plan to humiliate me or push me away from Michael. We didn't—" "Don't lie now," interrupted Emily. "It's too late to pretend decency. I know exactly what you think of me and my background. I know you consider me a fortune hunter who tricked Michael to move up in life." "Isn't that what you are?" asked Amanda, venom in her voice. "No," replied Emily, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's what you would like me to be because it would be easier to destroy me." Mrs. Margaret watched everything with satisfaction, like a proud teacher seeing her student finally stand up for herself. "Go on, dear," she encouraged. "During these 3 years," said Emily, "I learned more about you than I would have in a lifetime of normal conversations. I saw how you treat Dorothy, who has worked here for 15 years with dedication. I saw how you talk about the neighbors behind their backs. I saw how you make dishonest business deals and then come home pretending to be respectable people." George turned red with anger. "These are very serious accusations, young lady." "They are observations," corrected Emily. "Observations from someone you considered incapable of understanding what was happening around her." Michael was silent, processing everything he heard. Emily noticed he was struggling between the anger of being deceived and the curiosity to understand his wife's motives. "Michael," she said, softening her voice, "I know you have every right to be angry with me. What I did was cruel and unfair to you." "Why, Emily?" he asked, pain in his voice. "Why did you pretend to be mute? Why didn't you trust me?" The question she feared most had arrived. How to explain that it had started as a small test and turned into a prison she couldn't escape? "At the beginning," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I really did speak normally. Remember our first dates? We would talk for hours." Michael nodded, remembering those happier times. "But when you brought me to meet your family, I felt diminished. Every comment about my clothes, my education, my family made me feel smaller." "My family only wanted the best for me," said Michael, but without much conviction. "Your family wanted a doll," retorted Emily. "A decorative wife who wouldn't cause trouble, wouldn't voice opinions, wouldn't exist beyond the role of Mrs. Williams." Cynthia tried to protest, but Emily continued. "One day, I was so tired of the criticism that I decided to stay quiet during a visit. I wanted to see if at least that way I could get some peace." "And did you?" asked Michael. "I got something worse," admitted Emily. "I got to see you as you really are when you think no one is paying attention." She turned to Cynthia and Amanda. "You talked about me as if I were a problematic pet. You discussed ways to train me, educate me, mold me into what you wanted me to be." "We were trying to help," said Cynthia, but her voice sounded defensive. "They were trying to erase me," corrected Emily. "And when they saw I wasn't reacting, they felt free to say anything, make any plan, no matter how cruel." Amanda crossed her arms, assuming a defensive posture. "If you heard everything, then you know our concern was legitimate. Michael was suffering in this strange marriage." "Michael was suffering because you wouldn't stop telling him he was suffering," Emily countered. "You planted the idea in his head that our marriage was doomed to fail." Everyone looked at Michael, who seemed to be having his own revelation. "It's true," he murmured. "You kept saying I seemed sad, that I wasn't the same anymore, that Emily was changing me." "Because it was true," shouted Cynthia. You did change. You became more withdrawn, more distant. I became more distant because you made me feel guilty for loving my wife, said Michael, his voice rising. With every visit here, you found a new flaw in Emily, a new reason for me to be ashamed of her. Emily felt tears of relief burning her eyes. Finally, Michael was understanding what had happened to them. But that doesn't justify the lie, said George, trying to regain control of the situation. She deceived us, Michael. How can you trust someone capable of pretending to have a disability for 3 years? How can you judge someone for protecting themselves from a family that planned to destroy their marriage? Asked Mrs. Margaret, intervening in the conversation. We didn't plan to destroy anything, protested Cynthia. No? Emily went to the table where the documents they had brought were. And these papers? This agreement that would turn me into a pariah without rights? This 6-month deadline for me to meet your standards or have my marriage annulled? That's asset protection, said George without conviction. That's legalized humiliation, Emily countered. It's the official way to turn me into a second-class citizen in my own home. Michael picked up the documents and began reading carefully. His expression darkened with each page. My God, he murmured. You really did this. You really planned to take away all her rights. Michael, son, you need to understand that. No, he shouted, throwing the papers on the floor. You're the ones who need to understand. Emily is my wife, not an intruder you can expel whenever you want. Emily watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. It was good to see Michael finally defending her, but it hurt to realize how much his family had managed to poison their relationship. Michael, she said softly, may I continue explaining? He nodded, still visibly shaken by the discovery of the documents. After that first time, I stayed silent. I realized I had discovered something powerful. When people think you can't defend yourself, they show you who they really are. And you decided to use that against us, accused Amanda. I decided to protect myself, corrected Emily. With every visit, every dinner, you proved my silence was necessary. If I spoke, if I gave my opinion, if I showed personality, you would find 1,000 other ways to attack me. But why didn't you tell me? Asked Michael, pain in his voice. Emily hesitated. This was the hardest part to explain. Because you were changing too, she admitted. The pressure from your family was affecting us. You began to doubt our love, to question whether we had a future together. That's not true, protested Michael, but without much conviction. Isn't it? Emily looked him directly in the eyes. When was the last time you defended me before today? When was the last time we went out alone, without interference from your family? Michael fell silent, realizing she was right. I was losing you little by little, continued Emily. Every comment from your family about me made you question yourself. I saw you pulling away, doubting, being ashamed of me. Emily, if I revealed that I could speak, that it had been my choice to stay silent, would you understand? Or would you be so angry you'd leave me? The question hung in the air. Michael seemed to be wrestling with his own feelings and memories. She's right, said Mrs. Margaret. Emily told me about your doubts, Michael, about how you were changing, becoming colder toward her. I was never cold to Emily, Michael defended himself. Not cold, corrected Mrs. Margaret, but distant, condescending. You started treating her like a fragile person who needed protection, not like a wife who deserved respect. Emily saw Michael processing the words and knew Mrs. Margaret had hit the mark. It's true, he admitted, lowering his head. I started treating her as if she were broken, as if she needed to be cared for, not loved. And that's why the silence became an addiction, said Emily. It was easier to be the silent, mysterious wife than to risk being rejected for the real woman I am. Cynthia, who had been quiet for a few minutes, decided to resume the offensive. Very touching, this whole story, she said with sarcasm. But the fact remains, she lied to all of us for 3 years. How do we know she isn't lying about other things too? Like what? Asked Emily, turning to face her. Like your background, for example. Who guarantees you really came from a humble family? Maybe you're a seasoned con artist who saw an opportunity to marry a rich man. Emily smiled, a smile that held no amusement. "You're right to doubt my background," she said calmly. The comment took everyone by surprise. Michael looked at her with concern. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, there are some things about me you don't know," replied Emily, adopting a more confident posture. "Things I've kept secret for reasons very similar to those that made me stay silent." Mrs. Margaret smiled, knowing exactly where Emily was heading. "What kind of things?" asked George, suspicious. "Well," said Emily, walking slowly around the table, "you all always assumed I came from a poor family, uneducated, without resources. And I let you assume that because I wanted to see how you would treat me." "You don't come from a poor family?" asked Michael, confused. "My parents really didn't have much money when they were alive," explained Emily. "But I have maternal grandparents you never knew existed." "What grandparents?" asked Amanda, interested despite herself. "My maternal grandparents, Robert and Mary Thompson, owned one of the largest coffee plantations in Central California," revealed Emily calmly. "When they died 2 years ago, they left me a considerable inheritance." The silence in the room was almost tangible. Everyone looked at Emily as if she had just revealed she was an alien. "What inheritance?" asked Michael, his voice hoarse. 3 plantations, a coffee processing factory, 2 apartments in Los Angeles, and a bank account with more money than you can imagine," said Emily, keeping her tone casual. Cynthia turned pale. "That's impossible. We investigated your past when Michael announced the engagement." "You investigated superficially," corrected Mrs. Margaret. "Emily asked me not to mention the inheritance to anyone. She wanted to be sure Michael loved her for who she was, not for what she had." "And during these 3 years," we asked George, "you had access to this inheritance and said nothing?" "I had access and used it well," replied Emily. "I invested part of the money, donated another part to charities, and saved the rest for when it would be needed." "Needed for what?" asked Michael. "To start over when my marriage ended," said Emily simply. The statement was like a bomb. Michael turned pale. "Your marriage? You were planning to leave me?" "I was preparing for that possibility," admitted Emily. "Over the last few months it became clear that your family would never accept me, and that you were starting to accept their opinions about me." "Emily, Michael, you signed these documents," she said, pointing to the papers on the floor. "You may not have read them before, but your signature is there. You agreed to strip me of all rights if our marriage didn't work out." Michael picked up the documents again and examined the last page. His signature was there, clear and unmistakable. "I don't remember signing this," he murmured. "You signed it last week," said George, embarrassed. "You said they were company documents, that they needed your signature urgently." "You tricked me." Michael looked at his father in disbelief. "You made me sign an agreement against my own wife without me knowing." "We did what was necessary to protect you," said Cynthia, but her voice sounded weak. "Protect me from what?" shouted Michael. "From being happy? From having a stable marriage? From loving my wife?" Emily watched the family argument with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. It was good to see Michael finally understanding what his family had done, but it hurt to see the pain in his eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "may I finish my explanation?" He nodded, still visibly shaken. "When I realized you had made me sign legal documents without my knowledge, I knew it was time to make a definitive decision," said Emily, looking at each family member. "What decision?" asked Amanda nervously. "The decision to reveal who I really am and let everyone make their choices based on the truth, not on lies and manipulations." Mrs. Margaret rose from her chair. "Emily, dear, it's time to show them the other documents." "What other documents?" asked Cynthia, alarmed. Emily took from her bag a folder she had brought with her, but that no one had noticed during the entire evening's drama. "These documents," she said, opening the folder on the table, "prove everything I just said. My grandparents' death certificates, the will leaving the inheritance to me, bank statements, property deeds." George picked up some of the papers and began to examine them. His expression gradually changed from skepticism to absolute shock. "This is real," he murmured. "She really inherited a fortune." "A considerable fortune," confirmed Mrs. Margaret. Emily is technically richer than the entire Williams family combined. The revelation landed like a bomb. Cynthia seemed to be having trouble breathing. Amanda stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "But why did you hide this from me?" asked Michael, more confused than angry. "For the same reason I hid my voice," explained Emily. "I wanted to know if you loved me for who I was, not for what I represented or possessed." "And did you find out?" he asked, his voice tense. Emily hesitated. This was the most important question of the evening. "I found out that you loved me," she said finally, "but I also found out that you didn't respect me enough to defend me when I needed it." The words cut through the air like a blade. Michael fell silent, knowing she was right. "For 3 years," continued Emily, "your family humiliated me, belittled me, planned my expulsion, and you stayed silent. Sometimes you tried to protest weakly, but you never took a firm stand." "I was trying to keep the peace." "You were choosing the easier side," interrupted Emily. "It was easier to let me absorb the criticism than to confront your family." "That's not true," protested Michael, but his voice didn't sound convincing. "Isn't it?" Emily turned to him. "How many times did you truly defend me? How many times did you tell your mother to stop her cruel comments? How many times did you refuse to participate in the humiliations?" Michael couldn't answer, because he knew there was no possible defense. "Emily," said Cynthia, trying to adopt a conciliatory tone, "now that we know the truth about your financial situation, perhaps we can reconsider—" "Reconsider what?" asked Emily coldly. "The years of humiliation? The plans to kick me out of the family? The way you treated someone you considered vulnerable?" "We didn't know your true situation," said George, trying to justify himself. "Exactly," replied Emily, "and that proves you only respect money and social position. If I were truly a poor and timid girl, you would feel justified in treating me like trash." The comment hit home. The Williams family fell silent, realizing they had been exposed in the worst possible way. "Besides," Emily continued, "you judged me for 3 years based on prejudices and assumptions. How can I trust people who change their opinion about someone just because they discover that person has money?" Amanda finally found her voice. "You were dishonest with us. You pretended to be one thing when you were another." "I revealed exactly who you were," Emily countered. "You showed yourselves to be prejudiced, cruel, and petty when you thought it was safe to be so. I just provided the opportunity." Mrs. Margaret watched the argument with interest, as if she were watching a play she knew by heart. "Emily," said Michael, approaching her, "I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't defend you as I should have, but I still love you. Can we start over?" The question she feared most had arrived. Emily looked at the man she had loved for 6 years and saw both the qualities that made her fall in love and the weaknesses that nearly destroyed their relationship. "Michael," she said softly, "you love me, I know that, but you love your family's approval more than you love me." "That's not true." "Yes, it is," she interrupted. "For 3 years you chose family peace over my dignity. You let them humiliate me because it was easier than creating conflict. But now I know the truth," he said desperately. "Now I can defend you properly." "Now you know I have money," Emily corrected. "And that has completely changed how your family sees me. But what if I didn't have money? What if I were truly a poor and vulnerable girl? Would it be acceptable to treat me badly in that case?" Michael couldn't answer because he knew the question was a trap. Any answer he gave would be wrong. "Emily," said Mrs. Margaret, approaching, "show them the last document." Emily hesitated for a moment, then took a sealed envelope from her folder. "What is that?" asked George. "It's a recording," Emily replied calmly. "What recording?" asked Cynthia, alarmed. "A recording of everything said here today," explained Emily, "and of many other conversations we've had over the years." Panic set in among the Williams family. Amanda turned pale, Cynthia began to stammer protests, and George seemed to be calculating the legal implications. You recorded us without permission?" Michael managed to ask. "I protected myself," Emily corrected. "When people plan to harm me legally as they did with these fraudulent documents, it's only natural that I take precautions." Fraudulent documents, repeated George. An agreement signed without one party's knowledge is fraud, explained Mrs. Margaret, and making someone sign documents pretending they're something else is also a crime. We didn't commit any crime, protested Cynthia. Yes, you did, said a new voice from the door. Everyone turned and saw an elegant middle-aged woman entering the room accompanied by Dorothy. Who are you? Asked George, authoritatively. I'm Miss Jennifer Wilson, Emily's attorney, replied the woman, placing her briefcase on the table. And I'm here to resolve some legal matters. Emily smiled for the first time that evening. It was good to have reinforcements arriving. Miss Jennifer, she said, could you explain to the Williams family the legal implications of what they've done? With pleasure, replied the attorney, opening her briefcase. First, inducing someone to sign legal documents without proper disclosure constitutes fraud. Second, the terms of this agreement are considered predatory and therefore null and void. Third, the recordings my client made are perfectly legal, as they were made in self-defense. Self-defense? Asked Mary. When there are threats of unjust legal proceedings, a person has the right to protect themselves by documenting conversations, explained the attorney. George attempted to adopt a threatening tone. And what do you want with all this? Money? Blackmail? Miss Jennifer laughed. Mr. George, haven't you understood yet? My client has more money than your family. She wants nothing from you except peace and respect. Then what do you want? Asked Cynthia. We want you to sign some documents, said Emily, taking control of the situation again. What documents? Asked Michael, worried. Miss Jennifer took out some papers from her briefcase. First, a document committing to nullify the fraudulent agreement you made Michael sign. Second, a commitment statement to no longer interfere in Michael and Emily's marriage. Third, a formal apology for the treatment my client received. And if we refuse? Asked George. Then the recordings will be handed over to the proper authorities, along with a formal complaint for fraud and emotional distress, replied the attorney calmly. The silence that followed was tense. The Williams family was clearly weighing their options and realizing they didn't have many. This is blackmail, murmured Cynthia. This is justice, corrected Emily. You had 3 years to treat me with respect and chose the path of cruelty. Now you have to face the consequences. Michael seemed to be going through an internal crisis. He looked alternately at Emily and his family, clearly torn. Emily, he said finally, if they sign these documents, will you stay with me? The question she most feared had arrived. Emily looked at the man she loved and saw their entire history reflected in his eyes. The love was there, but also the weakness, the dependence on family approval, the difficulty in taking firm stands. Michael, she said softly, I need you to understand something very important. What? I don't want you to choose between me and your family. I want you to have enough courage to choose what's right, regardless of who's involved. I choose you, he said quickly. You're choosing now because you discovered I have money and your family is in trouble, she replied sadly. But where was that choice during the 3 years when I needed it? Emily, please. Michael, she interrupted. You're a good man, but you're a weak man, and I need someone who's strong enough to love me under any circumstances. The words hurt Michael like physical blows. He knew she was right, but couldn't accept that he was losing her. I can change, he said, desperate. I can learn to be stronger. You can, agreed Emily, but not with me. You need to find that strength for yourself, not to save our marriage. Mrs. Margaret approached Emily and held her hand. Dear, are you sure? I am, replied Emily, with more firmness than she felt. 3 years of silence taught me many things about myself. One of them is that I deserve a love that doesn't need special conditions to exist. Miss Jennifer observed the scene with professional interest, but also with a hint of admiration for her client's courage. So, she said, what is everyone's decision? Cynthia looked at the documents, then at Emily, then at Michael. It was clear she was doing mental calculations about the costs of each option. If we sign these papers, she finally said, will you leave and let us be in peace? I will leave, confirmed Emily. But peace depends on you. If you keep trying to interfere in Michael's life or spreading lies about me, the recordings can still be used. And Michael? Asked George. Does our son stay or go with you? Emily looked at Michael with affection and sadness. Michael will stay here and discover who he really wants to be when no one is forcing him to choose sides. Emily, no, begged Michael. Don't abandon me. I'm not abandoning you, she said with tears in her eyes. I'm setting you free, and I'm setting myself free too. She turned to the Williams family one last time. Will you sign the documents? Cynthia was the first to pick up the pen. She signed quickly, as if wanting to get rid of an unpleasant task. George and Mary followed suit, clearly resigned. There, said George, tossing the pen on the table. We're even. Not yet, said Miss Jennifer. There's still the apology. What do you mean? Asked Mary. A sincere and public apology for the treatment my client received for 3 years. Cynthia turned red with anger, but knew she had no choice. I apologize, she said, through clenched teeth, for the misunderstanding of the last few years. I accept, Emily said simply. She turned to Michael one last time. Take care of yourself, Michael. You deserve to be happy, but first you need to discover who you are when you're not trying to please everyone. Emily, please, he began, but she gently interrupted him with a gesture. Maybe one day we can be friends, she said, when you've found your own voice. She picked up her purse and walked toward the door, followed by Mrs. Margaret and Miss Jennifer. On her way out, she stopped to speak with Dorothy, who was waiting in the hallway. Dorothy, she said, thank you for all your kindness during these years. Everything will be all right, dear, replied the housekeeper, with tears in her eyes. You are strong. I always knew you were. Emily smiled and walked out of the house where she had spent the last 3 years in forced silence. Outside, a car was waiting for her. Where to, dear? Asked Mrs. Margaret. Home, replied Emily. To my real home. As the car drove away down the elegant street of Beverly Hills, Emily looked out the window and saw Michael standing in the doorway, watching her leave. She felt a pang of sadness, but also a deep sense of relief. She was finally free to speak, to be herself, to live without masks or pretense. The 3 years of silence had been painful, but also revealing. She had learned about strength, dignity, and the value of self-respect. You know, she said to Mrs. Margaret, I think I'm going to enjoy speaking again very much. You will, agreed the old friend. And now that you've found your voice, never let anyone try to silence you again. Emily smiled, feeling for the first time in years a sense of complete freedom. She had a whole life ahead of her to build, healthy relationships to form, and most importantly, the opportunity to be authentically herself. 6 months later, she was living on one of the coffee plantations inherited from her grandparents, personally managing the family business and discovering talents she never knew she had. She had enrolled in a rural management course and was learning about coffee, sustainability, and agricultural management. One day she received a letter from Michael. In it he shared that he had moved out of his parents' house and was going to therapy to better understand himself. He apologized again for what had happened and thanked her for having the courage to show everyone the truth. I'm not asking for a second chance, he wrote. I know I don't deserve it yet, but I hope that one day you can fully forgive me and that I can prove I've learned from my mistakes. Emily folded the letter carefully. Perhaps one day they could meet again as different people, more mature and honest. But for now she was content rediscovering who she was when no one was trying to mold her into something she wasn't. Mrs. Margaret visited the plantation often, always bringing news and stories from the city. It was she who shared that the Williams family had completely changed their behavior after the incident. Cynthia had started attending a reflection group on family relationships, and Amanda was doing volunteer work with people with disabilities. Sometimes, Mrs. Margaret said during one of these visits, people need a mirror to see who they really are. And sometimes, Emily replied, looking out at the coffee field stretching to the horizon, we need silence to hear our own voice. End of story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of Emily's courage? Do you believe she made the right choice by revealing the truth and moving forward with her own life? Tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most, and if you've ever been in a situation where you had to find the strength to stand up for yourself. Leave a like if the story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will make you reflect on relationships, family, and self-esteem.